The smoke still rose from the ceremonial pyre when Lieutenant Commander Kestrel Ghost Vance watched her dress blues disappear into orange flames. 23 years of service ribbons curled into ash, Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross, Combat Action Ribbon, each medal representing blood she'd shed for men who now celebrated her forced retirement. The brass band played taps while her former squadron mates avoided eye contact, their faces masks of practiced indifference. Medical discharge, the Commodore had announced with bureaucratic precision. Post-traumatic stress following the Kandahar incident. 3 little words that erased 2 decades of flawless service, reducing her to a liability file stamped with red ink. Ghost had piloted everything from Cobras to Ospreys through hell itself, but one night of survivor's guilt had become her death sentence. The ceremony concluded with military efficiency. Handshakes, hollow condolences, promises to stay in touch that everyone knew were lies. Ghost collected her discharge papers and walked toward the parking lot, her civilian clothes feeling foreign after decades in uniform. Behind her, laughter echoed from the officers' club, the sound of men relieved to close another uncomfortable chapter. 6 months later, that same laughter died in their throats. The emergency klaxon pierced Coronado's pre-dawn silence like a blade through silk. Red lights bathed the Special Operations Command briefing room as satellite feeds displayed chaos unfolding 8,000 miles away. A diplomatic convoy, including the Secretary of Defense and 3 allied ministers, had vanished somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains. 24 hours of radio silence. No GPS signals. No emergency beacons. "Weather's moving in fast," announced Captain Rodriguez, his weathered face grave beneath the harsh fluorescence. "Visibility 0 by 800. We've got maybe a 4-hour window before that valley becomes a death trap." The assembled SEALs studied terrain maps that looked like abstract art, jagged peaks, impossible angles, elevations that made helicopters wheeze like dying animals. Standard rescue protocols required visual contact for extraction. In those mountains with that storm system, visual meant suicide. "Sir," a young operator raised his hand. "Request permission to speak freely." Rodriguez nodded. "This mission's impossible. We need someone who can fly blind through mountain passes in 0 visibility, someone with combat experience in that exact terrain." The room fell silent. "There's only one pilot crazy enough to pull this off." Rodriguez's expression shifted from confusion to recognition, then to something approaching disbelief. He reached for his secure phone, fingers hesitating over keys that would dial a number he'd sworn never to use again. Outside, storm clouds gathered like vultures, and somewhere in the darkness, important men were running out of time. The call would change everything, again. Ghost answered on the first ring, her voice steady despite being awakened at 3:47 hours. "Vance. We need you." The silence stretched across the connection like a held breath. Years of accumulated resentment, betrayal, and professional assassination hung between them. Rodriguez could hear her breathing, could almost feel her calculating the cost of forgiveness versus the weight of duty. "When do I suit up?" she said finally. 3 hours later, Ghost walked through the same gates where they'd burned her uniform. But this time, she wore something different: SEAL combat gear, complete with Trident insignia and authorization codes that made hardened operators step aside. The base that had discarded her now desperately needed her skills, and everyone knew it. Lieutenant Hayes, barely old enough to shave, goggled at her approach. "Ma'am, are you sure about the weather conditions? The mountains are." "Kid," Ghost interrupted, adjusting her helmet's night vision system, "I've flown through weather that would make God himself file a flight plan." She paused, studying the satellite imagery on her tablet. "Besides, those peaks don't scare me. They should be worried about what's coming for them." The hangar doors groaned open, revealing her aircraft. A modified MH-60M Black Hawk bristling with defensive systems, and equipped with terrain-following radar that could thread needles in absolute darkness. Ghost ran her pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Each switch, engage a familiar friend returning after forced separation. Ghost, this is Control, crackled through her headset. Final weather update shows deteriorating conditions ahead of schedule. You've got maybe 90 minutes before that valley becomes completely socked in. She keyed her radio, voice calm as morning coffee. Control, Ghost, copy all, weather never stopped me before. A pause. Besides, the dead don't wait for clear skies. Her crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Tors, secured the cabin and gave her thumbs up. No words necessary. They'd flown together before, back when the Navy still wanted her expertise. Now they were reunited by necessity, professional soldiers doing what politicians couldn't. The rotors spun up with increasing intensity, whipping the hangar's dust into miniature cyclones. Ghost felt the familiar sensation of liftoff, that moment when Earth released its grip and she became one with the sky. Below, the base shrank to matchbox proportions. Ahead, mountains waited like sleeping giants. Entering hostile airspace in 30 minutes, she announced to her passengers, 6 SEALs who'd initially questioned having a washed-up pilot. Now they sat silent, impressed despite themselves by her smooth handling of treacherous updrafts. The first mountain peak emerged from morning haze like a cathedral spire, its snow-covered face reflecting early sunlight. Ghost banked left, following a valley that twisted through the Hindu Kush like a serpent's spine. Her instruments showed increasing altitude, decreasing air pressure, and weather conditions that would challenge even experienced mountain pilots. Ghost, be advised, Control transmitted. Satellite shows possible enemy movement in your target area. Could be Taliban, could be local militia. Treat as hostile until proven otherwise. Copy, Control, we didn't come this far to play nice. Ghost's voice carried an edge now, the professional killer emerging beneath the skilled aviator. Ghost is inbound and ready for contact. The helicopter plunged deeper into mountain territory, carrying 6 warriors and 1 woman who'd already died once in the service of her country. This time, she intended to return alive. Weather closed behind them like a door slamming shut. The valley ahead narrowed to a corridor barely wider than their rotor span, with walls that rose vertically for thousands of feet. Ghost's hands moved across her controls with surgical precision, making micro-adjustments that kept them centered in the rapidly constricting passage. Jesus, whispered Petty Officer Martinez, peering through the cabin window at rock faces flashing past mere feet away. How the hell does she know where she's going? Tors smiled grimly. She doesn't, that's what makes her the best. Ghost's voice cut through their amazement. Gentlemen, welcome to the express route to hell. Next stop, know where you want to be. Her radar painted the valley ahead in electronic detail, showing obstacles that would pulverize lesser aircraft. But Ghost read those green traces like sheet music, choreographing a dance with death itself. Static burst through their radios, a transmission fragment, garbled but unmistakably American. Convoy under attack, casualties mounting. Request immediate, the signal died, swallowed by electronic interference from the storm system now engulfing the peaks above them. That's our boys, Chief Petty Officer Washington announced, checking his weapons for the dozenth time. They're alive, but not for long. Ghost banked hard right, following her instruments through a turn that defied physics. The helicopter groaned under G-forces that pushed everyone against their restraints. Through the cockpit glass, the world became a blur of stone and snow, beauty and terror combined in equal measure. Landing zone coming up in 5 minutes, she announced. Weather's degrading fast. We'll have 1 chance to get in, 1 chance to get out. Make it count. The SEALs performed final equipment checks, their movements economical and deadly serious. Each man carried enough firepower to level a city block, but they all knew success depended entirely on the woman at the controls, the same woman their service had thrown away like damaged goods. Ahead, the valley opened into a circular depression surrounded by peaks that scraped the belly of heaven itself. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, important men were fighting for their lives, and time was running out faster than fuel in a burning tank. Lightning flickered through the storm clouds gathering overhead like artillery fire in a distant war. Ghost smiled beneath her helmet, recognition sparking in her eyes. She'd fought in worse weather, against longer odds, with less reliable backup. This was just another day at the office, the kind of office where mistakes were measured in body bags. "Inbound hot," she transmitted to control, her voice steady as steel. "Ghost is bringing them home." The radio crackled with response. "Copy, Ghost. The whole world is watching." Through the storm and the mountains, through the politics and the betrayal, one truth remained constant. When everything went to hell, they called the woman they'd tried to forget. And she answered every single time. The landing zone appeared through swirling snow like a mirage made of stone and desperation. Ghost could see muzzle flashes winking in the shadows, a firefight in progress, with the wrong side winning. Her instruments screamed warnings about wind shear, altitude density, and rotor clearance that would make safety inspectors weep. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the physics of controlled falling. 30 seconds out, she announced. "I'm putting us down hard and fast, be ready to move." The Black Hawk descended through turbulence that felt like riding inside a paint mixer. Ghost fought the controls, muscles straining against forces trying to slam them into unforgiving granite. At 50 feet, automatic ground proximity warnings began screaming. At 20 feet, she could see individual faces, American soldiers pinned behind overturned vehicles, returning fire against enemies hidden in rocky outcroppings. The helicopter touched down with bone-jarring impact, rotors still spinning at combat RPM. The SEALs poured out like water through a broken dam, immediately engaging targets that had been harassing the diplomatic convoy for hours. Ghost kept the engines hot, ready for immediate takeoff, her eyes scanning instrument panels for any sign of mechanical failure. "Ghost, this is Razor 6, came a new voice through her headset, young, scared, but professionally calm. "Convoy security element. We've got 3 wounded, including SecDef. Need immediate medical evacuation." "Copy, Razor 6. My boys are coming to get you. Stay low, stay alive." Through her windscreen, Ghost watched her passengers work with lethal efficiency. Washington directed suppressing fire while Martinez and his partner flanked left, using terrain features like a natural playbook. These weren't just soldiers. They were artists painting violence across a canvas of stone and snow. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past her rotor disc, close enough to taste the propellant exhaust. Ghost instinctively jinked right, then left, making the helicopter dance like a drunken butterfly. Return fire erupted from her door gunners, their M240s chattering death at unseen enemies. "We're taking fire from the North Ridge," Torres reported over intercom. "Multiple positions, coordinated movement. These guys know what they're doing." Ghost studied the tactical situation, her mind processing angles and opportunities with computer-like precision. The convoy vehicles offered limited cover, but the enemy held high ground with interlocking fields of fire. Standard extraction protocols called for suppressive fire and quick withdrawal, but standard protocols didn't account for cabinet-level officials bleeding out in hostile territory. "Razor 6 Ghost, I need you to mark your casualties with smoke. Purple smoke for immediate evacuation, red for urgent." "Ghost, Razor 6, we're out of smoke grenades. Expended all ordnance during the initial contact." The silence that followed spoke volumes. Without marking, medical evacuation became a deadly guessing game played with human lives as stakes. Ghost made a decision that would either save lives or end her career. Again. "Torres, take the controls. I'm going down there." Her crew chief's voice carried disbelief. "Ma'am, respectfully, that's not your job. You're the pilot." "My bird, my rules." Ghost unbuckled her harness and grabbed her personal weapon, a modified M4 carbine that had seen action across 3 continents. "Keep her running. I'll be back in 5 minutes." She dropped from the cockpit into chaos incarnate. Bullets snapped overhead as Ghost sprinted toward the convoy vehicles, her combat gear weighing nothing compared to the responsibility crushing her shoulders. Around the lead SUV, she found them. 3 men in expensive suits now torn and bloodstained, their diplomatic immunity meaningless against high-velocity projectiles. Secretary of Defense Morrison lay unconscious, a head wound painting his silver hair crimson. His breathing was shallow but steady, survivable if they moved fast. The British Minister of Defense was conscious but pale, clutching a shoulder that hung at an unnatural angle. The third man, someone Ghost didn't recognize, was beyond help. "Can you walk?" she asked the British minister. "I believe so," he replied with admirable understatement, "though I dare say this wasn't in the diplomatic briefing." Ghost almost smiled. Even facing death, politicians remain politicians. She keyed her radio. "Tours, I need immediate dust-off. One urgent, one priority. Mark my position with infrared strobe." "Ghost, this is Washington," came another voice. "We've neutralized the North Ridge, but movement on the South Slope. Estimate squad strength element moving to flank. You've got maybe 2 minutes before they reach effective range." 2 minutes to load casualties, secure the aircraft, and achieve takeoff in weather conditions that violated every safety regulation ever written. Ghost had worked with worse odds, but never with stakes this high. She grabbed Morrison under his arms and began dragging him toward the helicopter, each step a calculated risk against sniper fire and time itself. The British minister followed, his face gray with pain but his step steady. Behind them, the SEAL team provided covering fire, their weapons stitching deadly patterns across hostile terrain. Ghost could hear the distinctive crack of enemy AK-47s answering from multiple positions, professional soldiers, not random insurgents. She reached the helicopter as Tours brought it to a low hover, rotors churning snow and debris into a blinding cloud. The crew chief helped load Morrison while Ghost guided the minister into the cabin, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. "We're up," she shouted over engine noise, diving into her pilot's seat as the first mortar round impacted 50 meters away. The explosion showered them with rock fragments and reminded everyone that their enemies weren't giving up easily. Ghost pulled collective and cyclic simultaneously, lifting the overloaded aircraft through turbulence that felt like riding inside a concrete mixer. Her altimeter showed climbing numbers while her engine temperature gauges crept toward red lines. Too much weight, too thin air, too many variables spiraling toward catastrophic failure. "Control, Ghost. We're airborne with 2 casualties, requesting priority handling for medical emergency." She banked hard left, following the same valley that had brought them in, now made more treacherous by deteriorating weather and battle damage to her aircraft. "Ghost Control, copy all. Medical team standing by at Bagram. Weather shows clear approach from the south." Bagram Air Base lay 90 minutes away across some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Morrison's breathing was becoming more labored, while the British minister had lapsed into unconsciousness from blood loss and shock. Every minute counted, but pushing her damaged aircraft beyond safe limits could kill everyone aboard. Ghost made another decision that defined her character. She pushed the engines past red line limits, trading mechanical safety for human lives. The helicopter screamed through mountain passes like a mechanical banshee, leaving physics and regulations far behind. The storm that had threatened them earlier now provided concealment from enemy fighters that might be scrambling to intercept. Ghost flew through clouds thick as cotton, navigating by instruments alone, while her passengers fought their own battles against death itself. "Ghost, this is Control. Be advised, we're showing unusual engine parameters on your telemetry. Recommend reducing power settings to prevent catastrophic failure. Control Ghost. Negative. These boys don't have time for mechanical sympathy. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd already made peace with consequences. We're running hot and fast until we reach friendly territory. Torres monitored her patient's vital signs while the crew chief maintained defensive positions, their training taking over where conscious thought failed. They were flying through the edge of forever, carried by willpower and aviation fuel toward a base that represented safety, medical care, and answers to questions that went beyond this single mission. 20 minutes out from Bagram, Morrison regained consciousness. His first words were characteristic. "Did we get them all?" Ghost keyed her intercom. "Sir, we got who we came for. The rest can wait." "Good," Morrison whispered. "That's all that matters." But Ghost knew better. What mattered was the choice they'd made, all of them together, to risk everything for principles that transcended politics, nationality, and personal grudges. In those mountains, surrounded by enemies and weather that killed with equal efficiency, they'd rediscovered something the Pentagon briefings never mentioned: the brotherhood that made strangers into family and turned missions into crusades. Bagram's runway lights appeared through the storm like stars fallen to earth, each beacon representing safety, medical care, and the return to a world where people survived helicopter crashes and political careers could be rebuilt. Ghost lined up for final approach, her hands steady on controls that had carried them all beyond the edge of possible. The wheels touched concrete with the gentleness of a mother's kiss. Around them, emergency vehicles converged with lights flashing and personnel running, the choreographed response of professionals who understood that sometimes heroes came home broken but alive. As medical teams loaded her passengers onto gurneys, Ghost remained in her cockpit, running post-flight checks with mechanical precision. Her engines ticked and cooled in the aftermath of abuse that should have destroyed them. Her instrument panel showed caution lights that would require maintenance reports stretching into next week. "Ghost," came Tor's voice through her headset. "Medical team says both casualties are stable. They're going to make it." She nodded, removing her helmet for the first time in 6 hours. Her hair was matted with sweat, her face marked by goggle lines and stress that aged her beyond her years. But her eyes held something that hadn't been there before: the quiet satisfaction of a job completed, a debt repaid, and a place reclaimed in the brotherhood that had once cast her out. Outside, snow continued falling like nature's version of a military honor guard. The storm that had nearly killed them all was passing, leaving behind clear skies and the promise of better weather ahead. Ghost climbed down from her aircraft, every muscle protesting the abuse of the last few hours. Around her, ground crews swarmed over the helicopter, documenting battle damage and beginning repairs that would return it to combat readiness. The machine would fly again, they always did, with enough care and expertise. Chief Petty Officer Washington approached, his usually stoic expression showing something approaching admiration. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do." "No," Ghost replied, shouldering her flight gear. "You owe me a beer, there's a difference." Washington smiled, the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him since their initial briefing. "Roger that, ma'am. The first round's on me." As they walked toward the debriefing room, other personnel stopped their activities to watch. Word traveled fast on military bases, and the story of Ghost's return was already becoming legend. The woman they'd written off had returned wearing SEAL combat gear, carrying authorization codes that made generals take notice, and bringing home people that politicians had written off as acceptable losses. In the debriefing room, Ghost faced questions from intelligence officers, medical personnel, and senior commanders who needed to understand exactly how an impossible mission had become routine success. She answered with professional precision, providing facts without editorial comment, letting others draw their own conclusions about leadership, competence, and the cost of discarding talent based on bureaucratic convenience. Commander Vance, the base colonel asked finally, what's your assessment of enemy capabilities in the target area? Ghost considered the question, her mind reviewing tactical details that would influence future operations. Sir, they were organized, well-equipped, and professionally led. This wasn't random insurgent activity. Someone with military training coordinated that ambush. Recommendations for follow-up operations. Find whoever planned it and kill them before they kill more of our people. The room fell silent at her bluntness. Sir, respectfully, politics doesn't work against professionals. Only superior violence does. The colonel nodded, understanding the logic that separated career officers from combat veterans. Ghost had just provided intelligence that would shape operations across the region, another contribution to a war that consumed everything and everyone it touched. As the debriefing concluded, Ghost gathered her equipment and prepared for the long journey home. But home had become an undefined concept, somewhere between the civilian world that didn't understand her and the military world that had rejected her. She existed in the space between, useful when needed but invisible when convenient. Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Commander, we need to talk." Ghost followed him to a private office, where the conversation would determine whether this mission marked a new beginning or a final chapter in a career that had already died once. "Close the door," Rodriguez ordered. Ghost complied, then stood at attention, old habits reinforced by uncertainty about her current status. Was she still a contractor, a consultant, a problem that needed solving? Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Sit down, Kestrel." The use of her first name surprised her. In all their previous interactions, he'd maintained the formal distance that separated regular military from the special operations community. Now something had changed, perhaps respect earned through shared danger, or recognition that exceptional circumstances required exceptional people. "What's my status, Captain?" Ghost asked directly. "Am I in trouble for exceeding authority, or am I getting another medal I don't want?" Rodriguez almost smiled. "Both, probably. But first, I want to know what you want. The Secretary of Defense is alive because of you. The British minister will make a full recovery. When they write the intelligence report, your actions will be classified as mission-critical success under impossible circumstances." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The question is, what do you want to do with that success?" Ghost considered the question, her mind weighing options she'd never expected to have again. Return to civilian life, accept another military position that would inevitably end in disappointment, continue as a contractor, useful but never truly belonging. "I want to fly," she said finally. "I want to train the next generation of pilots who will face impossible missions with inadequate resources. I want to make sure they come home alive." Rodriguez nodded, unsurprised by her answer. There might be a position opening up, Special Operations Training Command, instructor pilot for high-risk scenarios. He leaned forward. But it would mean accepting active duty again, full military status with all the politics and bureaucracy that entails. Will they trust me with that responsibility? After today, they'd be fools not to. Rodriguez handed her a folder marked with security classifications that indicated serious intent. "The paperwork is already being prepared. Your reinstatement hearing is scheduled for next week." Ghost opened the folder, scanning documents that would restore her career, her benefits, and her place in the military community that defined her identity. But between the lines, she read something else. An apology written in bureaucratic language by people too proud to admit their mistakes directly. "Captain," she said finally, "I'll need one condition." "What's that?" "My call sign stays the same. I've earned the right to remain Ghost." Rodriguez smiled fully now, the expression transforming his face from stern authority to something approaching friendship. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Ghost it is." Outside, snow continued falling over Bagram Air Base, covering the scars of war with temporary beauty. Inside, a woman who had died professionally was being reborn into a world that finally understood her value. The uniform they'd burned would be replaced by something better, the respect of professionals who measured worth in mission success rather than political convenience. Ghost signed the papers that would define the next phase of her career, her signature steady despite the magnitude of change it represented. She was returning to active duty not as a favor or an exception, but as a recognition that the military needed people who could accomplish impossible missions under impossible circumstances. The phone on Rodriguez's desk rang. He answered with military efficiency, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. SOCOM operations. A pause, then his expression shifted to something approaching disbelief. "Yes, sir, she's right here." He held out the receiver. "It's for you. The president wants to speak with you personally." Ghost accepted the phone, her mind automatically shifting to the formal protocols required for communicating with the commander-in-chief. "Commander Vance speaking." "Commander," came a voice she recognized from television speeches and military briefings. "I'm calling to thank you personally for bringing our people home. The secretary told me what happened up there. He also told me what this country lost when we forced your retirement." "Sir, I was just doing my job." "No, Commander. You were doing something more important. You were proving that service means sacrifice, and that the best among us rise above personal grievances when duty calls." A pause. "I want you to know that your record is being reviewed, all of it, and some people owe you apologies they'll never have the courage to deliver." Ghost felt something she hadn't experienced in years, official recognition that transcended medal ceremonies and promotion boards. The President of the United States was acknowledging not just her recent success, but the injustice of her forced retirement and the military's failure to retain exceptional talent. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." "Commander, there's something else. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you when he's released from medical care. There's a position opening up that might interest you, Special Operations Aviation Command. It's a general officer position, with the authority to reshape how we train and deploy special operations pilots." The words hit Ghost like a physical blow. General officer, flag rank, represented the pinnacle of military achievement. After forced retirement and civilian exile, she was being offered a position that would make her one of the most powerful aviation leaders in the military. "Sir, I'm honored by the consideration, but nothing, Commander. You've proven something today that the Pentagon needs to understand. Competence matters more than politics, and results matter more than convenient narratives." The President's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped history. "Think about it. The country needs leaders who understand that winning isn't just about resources, it's about having the right people in the right positions." The call ended with formal courtesies, but Ghost remained holding the dead receiver, her mind processing changes that exceeded her wildest expectations. From medical discharge to general officer consideration, in less than 12 hours, the kind of transformation that redefined careers and rewrote official histories. Rodriguez studied her expression, reading the shock and possibility written across her face. "So, what did the commander-in-chief want?" "To offer me something I never expected to have again," Ghost replied, setting down the phone. "A future." As evening fell over Bagram, Ghost walked across the flight line where aircraft prepared for missions that would shape tomorrow's headlines. Her helicopter sat under maintenance lights, battle damage being repaired by technicians who understood that machines and people both required care to continue serving. The uniform they'd burned was gone forever, consumed by flames and political expedients. But what rose from those ashes was something stronger, a leader forged by adversity, tempered by injustice, and proven by impossible success under impossible circumstances. Ghost looked up at stars appearing between passing clouds, their light unchanged by human conflict or political maneuvering. Somewhere in those same mountains where she'd nearly died, other pilots would face similar challenges. Her job, her calling, was to ensure they returned home alive, carrying the knowledge that competence trumped politics and that true service transcended the temporary judgments of smaller minds. The war would continue, with or without her, but now she had the authority to influence how it was fought, by whom, and with what chance of success. The woman they'd discarded had returned wearing general stars, and the military would never be the same. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to prove that excellence recognized no boundaries except those imposed by limited imagination. Tonight, Ghost simply stood beneath familiar stars and smiled at the beautiful irony of redemption earned through service to those who had betrayed her trust. The future had never looked brighter, even surrounded by the darkness of war.